feeling an inner sense of something and I don't know what it is. It feels like something that might be equated with fear or slight anxiety. And I'm just wondering if talking about stuff will make it worse or make it better. I'm not sure. Sometimes I feel like when I start talking about stuff, then it opens up insights that could possibly be perceived as something fearful. And also, I'm in that period of time. This 2.5 month period of time is sort of the trend in my life where I've been rehospitalized. So that means from now until the end of December, it seems like that's the time, just in my natural sort of psychobiorhythm, if you want to call it that, that I go back into fear mode. And I'm wondering if talking about it while going through it will help or if it'll make it worse. I'm not sure. It feels kind of like dying while alive. And Krishnamurti talks about how life is death, is love, how it's one process. Life and death are one process, every moment. So I actually feel part of this whole bipolar thing is experiencing dying while alive and just not really having the context to not be afraid of that sensation, because it's really letting go of the elements of the ego or different parts of the self that need to die. And it feels scary. And so that's interpreted as, say, like anxiety, when really, to me, it's part of the ego dying, and it will pass. It will pass. And even with going into manic consciousness the very first time, a lot of my old self died. And then through the process of recovery, I did get some of it back. But it seems like that still wants to die in some way. So I'm wondering, my goal is to actually be able to go through this process in these next couple months, if that's going to be what I'm faced with, without being hospitalized. And now, so far, I haven't taken any extra medication like Seroquel, but I have one beside me, and I have some in my purse, so if I do get scared, I'll be able to numb myself to that fear and perhaps slow down the process. I don't know if it slows it down or if it stops it or if it keeps going, but then I can't necessarily feel it as much. I'm not sure how it works, but I'm going based on the assumption that it will pass. So if I start to have that feeling and I take a Seroquel right away, I'm not going to know. And if I wait 10 minutes, it might pass. Now, it did pass the other day when I went on for about 10 minutes. And today, right now, I have just this very vague sensation of it. So it's not as strong, but it's there. So I could probably go on with this feeling for quite a long time. But if it gets worse, it'll either get worse and then pass, or it'll get worse and then worse. And at some point, I would have to take something to make me feel less terrified. Because if I get too terrified, what happens is I feel like then I start to dissociate and I don't know who I am. And when it gets to that point, I might not actually have the supposed free will to take the Seroquel. So I need free will to take Seroquel. That rhymes. So as long as I still have that and I'm not too terrified, because the thing is, if I have a terrified feeling, my mind screen might start to have some reasons why I should be scared. Like, oh, you're dying, or you're going to die, or something. And then from that, I look for reasons why that could be true. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to be driving to a different city today, so yeah, I could. And then I'd be afraid to drive to the different city. So I think those thoughts stem from the terrified feeling or the fearful feeling, but they're not necessarily true. So I can again use that thing I did before, which is not now. It's not happening now. Yes, I'm having a fearful sensation, but I'm not in any danger. And so my mind might want to tell me those things, but I'm not necessarily going to believe it. But if it gets too fearful, then I could take a Seroquel. And I don't want to if I can avoid it, because it might pass and it will numb me out, which could be a good thing at some point. But it will maybe impede my ability to drive or to focus at work. And part of me wonders if this feeling is starting up again because I'm again working in the mental health system. And that was the last time I had a crisis, was in April. And now I've been working again in the system for about a month. And it's starting to come back. So it could also be telling me that it's not the right thing for me to do, even though I feel I have something to give and something to share, and I could be helpful, but I'm not sure if that's the way to do it. Because I also realize that I don't know if I'm really that passionate about peer support within the system as much as, say, peer support outside of the system. There's a lot of energy wasted trying to convince the system of the value of peer support, and they're not really seeing it, or they're not putting money into it. And maybe it's kind of a waste to actually create peer support within the system, because to me, I've experienced so-called vicarious trauma working with people in the system, supporting people, but I think it's less from the people themselves as much as seeing how the system is labeling people and judging people and not just purely caring for people. So the system is a lot different than, say, if somebody was taken to a peer respite center based on, say, the Soteria model, they would be received in a completely different way. And even myself, I went to 3-quarter housing for young adults, and it was part of like a mental health clubhouse. And even though I was on medication from community mental health, I was almost in a Soteria house now that I think about it, because they never said, oh, how are your symptoms today, or what's your diagnosis? It was just people, and the people that worked there were just kind and open and friendly and, you know, caring. And from that, I was able to go through this recovery journey, as it's called. And as soon as I started working in the system, which is the part of mental health service that didn't help me other than spending 5 minutes with my doctor to get my medication, which, you know, was helpful to some extent. You know, maybe it was helpful in the context of living in a community of amazing people, and maybe it was helpful in the context of when I worked in a medical office and I was just with people and it was all good and everything. Maybe it was helpful then, but maybe these medications aren't even strong enough or do enough to work in a system that is traumatizing. And they don't realize they're being traumatizing. If they did, maybe they could stop doing it, but they don't even see it. And that was my trouble, was working within the system, just seeing all these traumatizing elements. And they're not trying to do that. They're trying to be helpful. And that's one of the problems. They're trying too hard. They don't know how to just be there and care. And that's what I experienced in the clubhouse system, was just having a safe space, caring people, kind people, friendly people, and I was able to go about recreating my life without anyone ever saying, you should do this. And maybe that's the thing. Maybe it's just, why work in such a broken system? Why not work to augment what already works and have an opportunity to share some of my journey in the supported housing that I experienced years ago in a couple weeks. And I was writing some stuff down about it, and I was like practically crying because I'm just so grateful. And the people there, I would give any one of them a kidney, if they needed it, because they just helped me so much without even trying to help. They were just there. And yeah, maybe I'm feeling just a bit emotional today in general. And there's just elements of things that work so well, and the amount that's put into funding those things is pennies. And pennies don't even exist here in Canada anymore, but it's still pennies in comparison to all this effort they put into enforcing this paradigm that is so mechanistic and non-caring. And there's still caring people that work in the system, but it's not designed based on caring. And I don't know, I'm not sure if I can put my energy into that. I'm struggling a bit. I'm just wondering if I'm going to falter and end up in the psych ward, or practically in the psych ward, or needing to medicate myself with Seroquel, which, if I wasn't putting myself in this situation, would I need to medicate myself with Seroquel? Can I participate in fixing a broken system? Which, trying to fix something, if I compare that to the system trying to fix people, me trying to fix the system is the same thing. Whereas I could just go and be caring somewhere else, and maybe that would naturally do something else without having to put in an effort to try to fix something. I'm not sure. I could just be like a peer volunteer at the clubhouse. That place does keep me well, for sure. Yeah, it seems like the clubhouse is kind of like soteria in a way, but not really. Soteria would be like with people in full-blown psychosis, and people at the clubhouse are medicated out of that. I also was thinking about fish oil, and I talked to my doctor about it. I'm like, why don't you mention it to people? And she said because of the financial barrier. It's better for people to buy food than to buy fish oil. And that makes sense for sure. And I guess I don't really think about the financial stuff as much because I always operate over my means, but I'm lucky enough that for some reason a bank sent me a thing for a line of credit. So I use that and then just hope that I'll catch up at some point. But so I take vitamins and fish oil and stuff, but most people don't have the means for that. So I wish I could give the gift of fish oil. It's very beneficial. Haha, it's very beneficial oil. Get it? So I want to start that as part of the business, is providing fish oil to people to take to help with supposed psychosis. Ever since I had a mini panic attack last week, I've upped my intake of fish oil because it seems, or I've read in Dr. Mercola's stuff, that fish oil protects, or fish oil helps to repair the hippocampus, and that's what's needed to sort of sort out our memories and our things like that. So I've been taking more, and maybe it's beneficial oil to me too. I came to the realization too when I was laying in bed. I seem to get them in the night too. I wake up, but I don't wake up and write them down. I'm just like, yeah, whatever. If I remember, I remember. Because it seems like an endless stream of them. But I was realizing that when we're not the ego, we are the relationship, we're the space. So whatever arises in the space between us and two people, we are that. So yeah, we have a body through which we're perceiving these things and seeing the other person, otherwise we wouldn't have that. But we are what arises. So if we're thinking, we're just that thinking, and the thinking is dividing us and the other person. But if there's like something that arises that is to do with relationship, with those inner human dimensions, like joy and warmth and happiness, then we are that at that moment. We are that which arises in our consciousness. And by allowing that to arise more as opposed to thought, we're creating more of that in the social fabric. I also had the thought that when we first decouple from the ego reality tunnel that we believe to be ourselves, it takes a while to start to sort out that information again. And that's where some of the confusion comes in. It's almost like there's this reality where there's our own personal ego thoughts, and it's this stream that we think we are. And then we decouple from that, there's other thoughts, even sentences with other people's voice, and it's like the voices and all that, and confusion and delusion. And below all of that is the silence from which it all arises. It's almost like we need to fall through that confusion in order to get to the silence at the bottom, and just realize that we are that silence in which all of this arises. And it's not personal, actually. This morning it was strange. I was laying in bed and I was awake, and my eyes were closed, and I was listening to something with my headphones on. And in my mind screen I saw a flash, clear as day, of a woman standing in scrubs. And they were like turquoise, and then with black sleeves, black only sleeves. And I was thinking to myself, who is that? Nobody I know. And I realized that maybe my consciousness taps into someone that's about to die or something, and they look up, and like they're receding from their consciousness as they're dying, and they see a person like one last time or something. And that image that someone else sees can actually play on my mind screen in a way. And I don't know if that's true, but what I'm trying to say is, whether it's a flash in my mind, and that doesn't happen very much, of someone else that I don't know who that person is, or a flash of a sentence like that's fearful, it could be coming from somebody else or the collective. And just because it's not a constant one after the other that sometimes happens in full-blown psychosis, that makes me feel like completely terrified. Just to have one here and one there and one there in a spaced out way makes it less scary. But what I'm saying is, it still could be coming from the collective, because consciousness is a collective thing. I'm trying not to take it personally. In a way, detaching from one's personal ego is kind of like a war, because one is so attached and identified to it. And becoming detached, it starts to get confusing, and there's this war that's going on inside, this war of words, because the ego is a bunch of words, and then confusion is a bunch of words, delusion, hallucination, those all come from words and images, and those have nothing to do with the actual present moment. So they're from the past, and they can be from our own past, or they can be from the collective past. Because if we're detaching from those words and images that we identify as ourselves, and they're not true, well, then none of them are true, and none of them are us, whether they're the ones that we identify ourselves with as us, or they're not, whether they're something else. And the body feels as though maybe one is dying when the ego is starting to lose its grip, because whatever images we play in our mind is what we feel in our body. Even if we're thinking of something sad, we feel it in our body. Even if we're at, say, a happy event, like a wedding. But if we're feeling sad, we're not actually there in the happy event of the wedding. If we're thinking about something sad from the past, our body is experiencing that thing sad from the past. So when the ego detaches, it is like death, and the ego is spewing words of death and terror, and we feel that in our body. And sometimes, unfortunately, we mistake that as we have to die, or the body's going to die, or it's so scary that we end our body's existence because of that. So that's why I have my zap strap, in case I go into that mode where I think my body has to be ended, which means I think this state of terror is not going to end, or it's taken me over in such a way that I have to act something out that could be harmful to myself or others. And in my last video, I was talking about Linus Pauling saying some people have extra requirements of nutrients. They're genetically predisposed to needing those extra requirements. And to me, it seems like those genetic changes, or they're probably epigenetic changes, which there was no epigenetics in the 1960s, at least the concept of it. Those epigenetic changes are the epigenetic changes required to surf the universe. So the vitamins might actually be what are needed to suppress the universe. And in a way, when I think about it, working in the mental health system, it's a broken system. And so, in a way, I'm not able to surf the universe because I'm trying to not step in the puddles of the system. So that's a different way of being than actually surfing the universe. And that's why I want to create a social purpose business, is to be able to just surf the universe. Because I've gone to a lot of different things over the years and talked to people, and I've never met anybody that's on the same wavelength as myself completely, which makes sense because we're all different people. So I've realized I just have to create something myself and see what happens from that, even though I don't know what I'm doing. And I was actually thinking this morning, because I was writing up that thing for this day that I'm going to be speaking at a little bit. So whatever it is that I create could be somewhat like the clubhouse, in that there's no real direction. It's just, here are some options, here's safe space, and it's almost like create your safe space by having your representation agreement and your advance directive, as well as your RAP crisis plan, and your ZAP strap, and your PRN, and your safe housing if possible, and a person that you can speak to about things. And once you have those, explore. Because Tom Wooten talks about, and I agree, that if we just try to always be in remission, which isn't possible, like I've seen that, and I've gone into so-called psychosis by participating in working in the system. And a lot of psychosocial rehabilitation is to get people to get working again. And I get working again, I end up in the hospital. So maybe I'm in the wrong work, for one, but I also am able to go and do that. And even though that's happened 3 times now, I still go back at it, because I know that I can pick myself up again pretty quickly, even if I go into extreme terror. And the last hospitalization was so bad that now I have a representation agreement and advance directive and the ZAP strap thing, and I'm extra watchful of myself if I get into these fear states, to not tumble into a place where I need the hospital. And even if I did go into that extreme fear, which hasn't happened, I could potentially keep myself out of the hospital by just taking Seroquel and having someone bring me food, etc. So again, these next couple months will be key to seeing if I can do that. And if I again go into that extreme fear mode and require hospitalization or almost, then it might be time to say sayonara to this system, because it's one thing to take vitamins to, say, suppress mania or suppress surfing the universe. But if I need to take Seroquel to suppress all the fear I see by experiencing the system, by putting myself in that situation, it's not good, because I'm putting myself in that situation in all that fear, then I'm feeling fear, which will end me back up at the hospital fearful. So by journeying back into that, I'm journeying back into fear. Whereas the 3.5 years, the initial 3.5 years, I was just having fun, laughing, just being human. So I don't know, I'm not sure. I did tell myself this is like the last straw, and I'm just starting to feel it. I'm starting to sense that maybe it's not the right thing. I want it to be the right thing, but I'm not sure if it is. I feel like, why work in peer support and try and convince them that it's valuable when one could just create a peer network outside of that is valuable, and everybody that comes into it just sees the value and knows it's valuable, and there's no convincing necessary. And that's why I want to start the social purpose business, and the first thing I want to do is bring emotional CPR here, because that is a type of peer support. People wouldn't be peer support workers, and some people that get the training could just be people that have never experienced this kind of crisis, but it's at least going to create peers, people that can help someone through distress, or talk with someone through distress, versus pathologizing them, which is what the initiative out there is right now. And to me, this would take the pressure off of the system, because there would be people who know how to help people in distress, whether they've gone through it or not. And that could be the thing too, is there are a lot of caring people out there that are very, very good at helping people through distress, whether they have been in the system or not. So in a way, they can be a peer support worker or a worker, and it doesn't matter if they went through it or not. Because, for example, in what I've learned about the Soteria model, people that got hired there were not hired for their clinical knowledge. They were actually hired for who they were as people, whether they could be with people in extreme distress and not be disturbed and kind of just be. And there's people out there like that. They don't need any kind of education per se about the topic. So to me, it would be this company won't just be for people that are peers, but people who want to be peers, in that they want to be trained to support people through distress. And I think it's so important, like especially for youth and children, to have people who know how to help them through their distress, and not just say, oh my gosh, this person is experiencing anxiety, they need to go see a doctor. Like, that has its place, but a lot of it we as human beings can help people with. And then on a different level, why are we in so much distress? Why are we creating such a distressed society? Why are youth ending their lives? It's not because they are mentally ill. If we want to believe that and medicalize that, that's a nice way for us to sleep at night. But it's not the truth. It's much deeper than that. I also realize that I can say I have bipolar disposition. I don't think I have bipolar disorder. And as Tom Wooten would call it, bipolar in order, once you get yourself in order. And I talked in the last video, or in a different video, about I don't want to get myself in order to survive in this society. So right now I have myself somewhat in order to work in the mental health system, which is making me go back into disorder. In the same way, a person could get themselves in order to go back to some crummy job, which would eventually put them back in disorder, because they have greater things to do than that. So I feel it's important to connect one with one's greatness. And he does do that, because he talks about in those states, of certain states, you know what you can do, and you can turn bipolar into your advantage. So I know for me, if I'm kind of annoyed, like if I just have an annoyed feeling, that's a good time for me to clean out my closet, because I'll be like, I don't need this shirt, I don't wear this. Whereas if I'm in a different mood, I won't want to do it and I'll want to keep everything. So that's just a small example of knowing what state one is in and what one can do. So normally an annoyed state would maybe have no value, but I know the value of that state. I can get rid of some stuff. And so in that way, it is turning it into one's advantage. And I feel a piece of, like, once a person has gotten themselves in order, it's important to harvest one's most extreme mania for one's vision and what one wants to participate with going forward, which will help to naturally keep one in order, because that was something given to them by the order of the universe. It's like the orders of the universe. So to get in touch and in alignment with that is going to produce order. So I have not gotten in order with my original vision at this point in time. I even realize I'm probably working in the wrong thing, because I resonate more with homelessness, and that could be because if I didn't have a family, I probably would be homeless right now through my experience, and also violence against women. I experienced some violence, and I feel like that's what precipitated being diagnosed with a mental illness. So I don't actually feel like I have a mental illness. I feel like I was violated, and that translated into a mental illness because I wasn't able to support myself and get support in working through that. So again, I'm working in like the middleman category, which is, oh, well, you were diagnosed with a mental illness. But anyone that is a woman, and some men too, diagnosed with a mental illness often has had some kind of, say, trauma or violence against them. But then it's turned into a mental illness, which is then medicated, which again, that small label is given to summarize all the events leading up to that diagnosis. And all those events leading up to the diagnosis are a lot more stuff than just, oh, you're experiencing this symptom, this symptom, this symptom. Those symptoms are the result of all of the accumulated stuff. And then it appears as this illness label diagnosis once it becomes so obvious. But why have we created a society where that happens? And in a society where men rule, basically, and all the media is around that, and women and whatever, we don't acknowledge what everything in society is creating to lead up to that. And so I'm wondering, do I want to focus my efforts on the symptom, which is like 10 years removed from whatever, or the root cause? And that's why I like working with youth, but at the same time, I don't believe in mental illness, and I don't believe that these youth are mentally ill. It's appearing as that, but it's something a lot more fundamental than that. By just treating the symptoms of that, it's not getting to the root cause of it. And I don't think it's the youth's fault, but not because they have a brain disease. It's because they have brain dis-ease, and they're not at ease in this society. And this society is created in such a way that a certain chunk of people are in ease, supposedly, even though they're probably suffering underneath the surface. They're just faking it. People that have a mental illness just can't fake it anymore, that this is okay. If all the people that are supposedly normal and well working in the mental health system were just so genuinely happy and joyous in their own lives, that would probably naturally heal the people that come into contact with them that have supposed mental illness. But they're just as miserable. I feel like this talking is kind of like bipolar out loud. Hashtag bipolar out loud. And I do feel that consistency is a disease, and we give that disease to everybody. And then when people are not feeling consistent, they question themselves and are not at ease when there should be ease in being inconsistent. And through bipolar, I've had some things that have become disabilities, but I've also acquired special abilities or habilitation. I'm trying to make something else out of mania. It could be called mania, and all of this is my harvest of my mania, and I'll probably speak a million words, and it all is unfolded from that state of mania. So just the word mania can't describe what it is that I'm attempting to describe. And what it is that I'm talking about has nothing to do with anything, and it has no meaning or value whatsoever. And I also realize with mirror neurons, it's because Krishnamurti talks about how it's only one brain, one human brain, one human consciousness. And I feel that that mirror neuron effect is because it is one human brain. And I also realize that how they talk about we only know something happens after we decide, or it's already happened and then we decide to do it. So they question free will. And I realized, and I think I realized this when I was sleeping, that things just happen. And we abstract about it after it's already happened. So if we actually perform a motion, and they're actually testing a certain motion that we're deciding to do, so they're creating the decision, the apparent decision. So once we decide to do it, we actually abstract about it after the fact. So we're talking about what we're doing after we did it, not because we're talking about what we're doing, we did it. So the prefrontal cortex actually is just abstracting about what is happening or what has happened. It could also be that the brain is the mirror of everything out here. So everything outside of us is mirrored in the brain. So it happens outside first, that's where we do it, and then it's mirrored in the brain, and not vice versa. It makes sense because everything is happening out here. We're interacting and everything, and then the brain conceptualizes about it. If we're not conceptualizing, it's still happening. So we can take vitamins and medication to maintain normalcy. And I even wrote down normal-C, normal seeing, supposed normal seeing the consensus reality that we're all supposed to see. Because if we see something else, we're going to act in a different way and we're going to create something else. There is a pressure for us always to see through our ego, because if we didn't, if we saw together, if we were thinking together collectively, we would create something else completely. We wouldn't create these little personal prisons that we live in, and in our own personal success that would have no meaning to us whatsoever, and the whole world depends on that. The universe is trying to give us a different way of seeing, a different vantage point. And right now, the recommended daily intake of certain vitamins and minerals actually ensures that we become diseased over time and need some kind of pharmaceutical. And maybe we got way more nutrients in the past just from our food. And it seems like there could be a certain nutrient profile we need to have in order to be able to see in this new way, which is seeing from real vision instead of through the ego. So it's like the RDI, recommended daily intake, ensures our ego and it ensures that we'll become diseased and need some kind of medical care and live in fear because we're going to die. And so I think the universe comes in and gives us this vision, and then we fall from that vision, and it's a matter of getting that vision back in a way. We live in such a technological age. We live in an age where we can, say, take super high doses, mega doses of vitamins and minerals. Well, I haven't experimented with that as much, but never before in time could we do this. And it's a time when we really need this vision and start and acting and working together. And it's a time where we could, say, take a lot of certain vitamins. People already do experiment with taking different drugs to alter the way we perceive. That's really what happens, is it alters our perception. Now, how do we alter our perception in a way where we can still function in daily life? Because we can't always be high on whatever drug, because it eventually depletes our system. So how can we make those inner endogenous molecules and neurotransmitters and hormones and things that actually make us see in this way? The universe comes in and does this to us for a while in mania, but then it's not sustainable, and it could be because of interacting with reality, or it could be that maybe we deplete our nutrition required to make those. So there's epigenetic changes that are caused, and we're making different molecules. And that's what Linus Pauling was saying, that certain people have genetic differences that make them need a lot more of certain nutrients. And I know one that Dr. Abram Hoffer really recommended was niacin. I don't really take that much niacin, but maybe I could. And that would help people with schizophrenia, high dose niacin. And now, is that like a gatekeeper? Is that a way for people? If I had a schizophrenia disposition, maybe I would take niacin 95% of the time to block that visionary consciousness, because to me, it's actually epigenetic changes or genetic changes that are causing one to see in a different way. And if people that went into that were actually nurtured and their way of seeing was believed and also worked out, like if people are going into that through traumatic stuff and their trauma is worked through, then that sort of resolves that in the totality of the consciousness of reality. But if it's never worked through and people are just medicalized, then they're almost like